as you're even listening to this. This philosophy is saying this is a misperception of what's really happening. We are back with another episode of the Daily Vedantic, continuing our series of an overview of each chapter of the Gita, that Gita. In today's episode, we're going to go over chapter 8, Yoga of Imperishable Brahman. One of the things that's interesting about this chapter is it talks logistics, metaphysics, symbolism, all in one about the end of life. It also goes over what is Brahman. Brahman is a Sanskrit word that means the vast. So taking the exotic Sanskrit term out of the equation, the vast, the infinite, you could think of it as the absolute. Everything else is relative. And this being the absolute. So the yoga of imperishable absolute. That can kind of take some of the exotic nature out of it with some of the Sanskrit words. The imperishable absolute. Reality, as defined in Vedanta, is that which persists. Therefore, there is only the absolute truth is real because it persists. Is, was, and will always be. Versus something that's fleeting, like a dream in comparison to the waking world. Or this waking state in comparison to the infinite. That is why, in comparison to the higher state, this is not seen as real. This world, this experience, this universe. You can't say it's unreal, just like the dream isn't real, but something is happening. There are thoughts, there is a perception, there is an experience. But a good word that is used within this philosophy to highlight the differences between reality and unreality is a misperception. There is a misperception of what's really going on. In the case of the dream, there is a misperception that events are unfolding or a room is there when really it is just a projection of your mind. Similarly, there's a misperception in this waking state that there are similar aspects, walls around us, that there are other people. There is a misperception, not unreal because something is happening, but a misperception from reality, what is really happening, which is truth, consciousness, existence itself, the ground of being, the ground of all perception of which a misperception arises. I could feel pretty heady in episode 1 of this podcast. That is a 15-minute overview, summary of the whole philosophy. Takes you step by step from the shallow end of the pool to the deep and summarizes what this philosophy says about this experience of the waking state, as well as the other states. Chapter 8 talks about the end of this experience that we call a life. My favorite verse from this chapter, at least the one that I find myself thinking about the most, is verse 6 of chapter 8, where Krishna says to Arjuna, of whatever being one thinks at the end, while leaving the body, to that alone one goes, O Arjuna, because of constantly thinking of that being. This chapter talks about something pretty crazy, and that is that at the time of death, you'll just be a continuation of whatever you devoted your thoughts to in life. This is the same, and reincarnation is massively misinterpreted to be this thing where there's like this independent thing called time and life and the universe, and you plop in and out, in and out, in and out. This philosophy says nothing of the sort. There is no independent timeline, independent world that you're plopping in and out in 1972, you're back in 1973, or you're out in April 1st and you're back on April 2nd into a new body. This universe arises anew. And by the way, this is like a deep cut episode because this chapter's, well, each chapter has a pretty crazy amount of depth to it. But this is admittedly a very deep cut, deep into the pool type of episode. But the misinterpretation of the theory of reincarnation, which is just a theory within this philosophy, it's not a law, it's not anyone saying you've got to believe in it, is just that every moment like the dream where you plop in and you're 34 and you project out all of this time of why you're in this room and all of the history. If you start to think about it, this all makes sense that I'm in this room or I'm in this person's kitchen right now. But it was instantly created, manifested. And it's a projection that there was this temporal line, this timeline of which all of these things took place before, or this world that you're entering, when in truth, you and the world are projections happening at the same time. This is the case of the dream. I'm not even talking philosophy. This is just the dream. But this philosophy does say this waking state is an elevated version of that. And each moment is a reincarnation. There is a birth, a maintenance, a death. Next moment, rebirth. Maintenance of this moment, death. Each day, each week, month, season, year. Continual rebirth, maintenance, death. The person you take into the next meeting you have, it's going to be a continuation, even the birth of a brand new exchange, interaction, maybe meeting someone new. You are still going to keep the continuation of the person, the thought flow that you were, that you are, into this next experience. It's a continuation. And verse 6, chapter 8, outlines that every death of a day, death of a life, will lead to a continuation in the next moment, the next experience. Again, depart from this idea that it's a continual timeline of, all right, you died in 2001 and now you're coming back in 2000, I don't know, the next day, the next week, the next year. It is much more like the dream experience. Boom. You manifest the entire moment, experience, thinking there was an entire timeline leading up to it, but there is just this moment. Every memory that you have from before is a choice, selection, facts, projection backwards. And it is just as much a misperception of anything prior as we are misperceiving in this current moment. As you're even listening to this philosophy is saying, this is a misperception of what's really happening. But enough digression. This specific verse is talking about each new birth into a moment or a new life, a new experience, is going to be a continuation of wherever you placed your thoughts before. Whatever choice you make right now, choosing and building habitual thoughts on light, or choosing darkness and building our habitual thoughts on the darkness. The moment of death, it will just be a continuation of the habits, the choices we've been making up until that point. Of whatever being one thinks at the end, while leaving the body, to that alone one goes. Do you think of the lower self at the moment of death? At the moment of retiring at night? Do you think of the higher self? Are you concerned with the lower self, the selfish pursuits, 10,000 things that we want, or are you concerned with the higher ideals? Wherever we set our thoughts, that will be where we go. Wherever you plug in an address on GPS, especially in those Waymo cars that drive for you, that's where you're going to end up. And that's all that the theory of reincarnation says. You are not cast into a certain lot in life. You're not sent to hell. You're not sent to heaven. The divine just respects your choices. Your environment just respects your choices. Your inner state just respects your choices. And that next experience that you enter, that you reincarnate, to re-embody ourselves into, is just a lawful respect to an entire lineage of choices that we made. Where we place our thoughts is where we go at the time of death or at the time of entrance into an all-important meeting you might have for work in a couple hours. In this chapter, the whole philosophy is just saying develop an intellect, a capacity to choose wisely where we place our thoughts. That's today's reflection on the Daily Vedantic. We'll see you tomorrow when we tackle Chapter 9, the middle of the Gita.